The cave was a womb of ancient secrets, a sanctuary carved from the heart of the earth. For the clan, it was everything. A fortress against the monstrous shadows of the night, a refuge from the sun's savage wrath, and a keeper of their history. The air, thick with the scent of damp stone and wood smoke, was a breath of safety. But the ground, their trusted foundation, was a liar. It was the night of the great rain. Lightning, a jagged, angry wound across the sky, illuminated the valley in brief, violent flashes. Thunder was not a distant roar, but a physical blow that shook the very bones of the mountain. Inside the cave, a young female Homo habilis named Alara watched her child sleep. The sound of the storm a lullaby of primal fear. Her hand rested on the cool, solid stone wall. But the stone was not solid. It trembled. It moaned. It bled a thin, muddy slurry from a new crack that snaked its way down from the ceiling. The sounds of the storm outside were joined by a new, more terrifying sound from within. The groaning of the mountain, a deep, sickening chorus of rocks shifting and grinding. The ceiling above her child's sleeping form seemed to sag. The cave, their sacred refuge, was turning on them. The womb had become a tomb, and the ground, which had always promised safety, was preparing to swallow them whole. The storm had arrived with a sudden savage fury. The sky, once a brilliant expanse of blue, had curdled into a bruised, menacing purple. The air, heavy and humid, had burst open, releasing a torrent of rain that fell not in drops, but in solid sheets of water. Alara's clan had barely made it back to the cave in time, their bodies slick with mud. And water, their hearts pounding with the raw, exhilarating fear of the elements. The entrance to their cave, a massive gash in the face of the cliff, was a roaring curtain of water. Inside, they were safe, or so they thought. The cave was a vast, echoing chamber, its walls slick with the seepage of 1,000 seasons. Torches cast a flickering, golden light, turning the stalactites and stalagmites into bizarre, dancing figures. The air, thick with the scent of wet stone, wood smoke, and the close smell of many bodies, had a comforting warmth to it. The clan huddled together, their voices a low murmur of shared relief. They were all there, the old wise matriarch, Lyra, the strong, silent hunters, the chattering, wide-eyed children. Alara held her son Kai close. He was a small, fragile creature of 5 seasons, his face bright with a curiosity that had not yet been dulled by the harsh realities of their world. He giggled as the thunder rumbled, thinking it was a game. His innocence was a fragile shield against the terror she felt. The storm outside was a symphony of chaos. The wind howled like a pack of starved wolves, and the rain hammered against the rock with the force of 1,000,000 tiny hammers. The ground beneath them, usually so solid and dependable, began to tremble. It was a low, rhythmic thrumming at first, a vibration that felt like the pulse of the earth. But it grew in intensity, a deep, sickening groan that came not from the storm, but from the mountain itself. The clan fell silent, their eyes wide with fear. The sounds of the storm seemed to fade, replaced by the terrifying sound of their home protesting its own existence. A fine, powdery dust began to fall from the ceiling. A pebble, then another, dropped with a small, sharp sound onto the cavern floor. Alara looked at the ancient matriarch, Lyra. Her face, a map of 100 seasons of struggle, was a mask of terror. "The mountain is angry," she whispered, her voice a thin, reedy sound against the groaning of the earth. The clan began to stir, a low hum of fear rippling through them. They had heard the old stories of mountains that swallowed men, of rocks that crushed entire families. But these were just stories, meant to scare children into respecting the wild. Now, the stories were coming to life. A piece of rock, the size of a man's head, tore loose from the ceiling and crashed to the floor, narrowly missing a small child. The sound was deafening, a sharp crack that echoed through the cavern, followed by the sickening thud of rock on rock. Panic erupted. People screamed. Children wailed. The air, once so comforting, was now thick with dust and the scent of raw animal fear. Ilara clutched Kai, her mind a whirlwind of terror. The ground beneath her feet was no longer a refuge. It was a betrayer. The cave, their sanctuary, was becoming a tomb. And as a new, wider crack snaked its way down the ceiling, a shower of larger rocks cascaded down, blocking the main entrance. They were trapped. The cave, once a sanctuary of warmth and safety, was now a prison of dust and fear. The air was thick with the scent of pulverized rock, a gritty, suffocating smell that filled their lungs and caked their skin. The roar of the storm outside was a muffled, distant sound, replaced by the claustrophobic silence of the entombed. The main entrance, a jagged mouth of daylight, was now a solid wall of rock and rubble. A few small cracks allowed thin, jagged streaks of light to pierce the darkness, but they were not enough to guide them. The only source of light was the flickering, dying flames of the torches, which cast a grim, hopeless glow on the terrified faces of the clan. Panic had subsided, replaced by a deep, heavy resignation. The wailing of the children had died down, replaced by a quiet whimpering. Ilara held Kai, his small body pressed against her, his face buried in her chest. She could feel his rapid, panicked heartbeat, a tiny drum of terror against her own ribs. She whispered soothing words to him, a low, constant hum that was meant to calm him, but was also a desperate attempt to calm her own racing mind. They were trapped. No one had ever survived a collapse of this magnitude. This was the end. Zoro, the clan leader, a man of immense strength and quiet resolve, moved through the group, his face a mask of grim determination. He was their rock, their leader, but even his strength seemed to waver in the face of this absolute finality. He spoke in a low, rough voice, his words barely audible over the sound of the rain and the groaning of the mountain. "We must find a way out," he said. "There is another way, the old tunnels." The old tunnels. They were a legend, a whispered story of a secret passage, a hidden escape route that had been carved by the clan's ancestors. Few believed they truly existed, and even fewer knew where they began. A young man named Aris, his face streaked with dust and tears, shook his head. "They are just stories, Zoro. We are trapped. This is our end." His words, a chilling echo of their deepest fears, hung in the air. The clan murmured in agreement, a low, despairing chorus. But Zoro would not give up. "They are not stories," he said, his voice firm. "My father showed me. They are here." He walked to a far wall of the cavern, a place where the darkness was deepest. He ran his hands over the rough, cold stone, searching for something only he knew how to find. The moments stretched into an eternity of silence and fear. The air grew stale, thick with the scent of their despair. Ilara watched Zoro, a small flicker of hope igniting in her chest. If anyone could save them, it was him. But the hope was fragile, a tiny flickering flame in a sea of hopelessness. Then, with a low groan, Zoro pushed aside a large rock. Behind it, a small opening, barely large enough for a person to squeeze through, was revealed. It was not a grand passage, but a narrow, muddy tunnel that disappeared into a suffocating darkness. It smelled of earth and something else, something old and forgotten. The sight of the opening was a source of both relief and new terror. Relief that there was a way out, and terror at the thought of entering that suffocating darkness. The tunnel was a maw of blackness, a promise of freedom at an unimaginable cost. Ilara watched as Zoro disappeared into it, his torch a small, defiant light swallowed by the shadows. The clan stood motionless, a silent, terrified congregation. The question was not just if they would follow him, but if they had the courage to face the unknown, to crawl through the belly of the earth and pray that it would not swallow them whole. The tunnel was a nightmare made real. It was a suffocating, claustrophobic passage that twisted and turned with a malevolent, confusing logic. The air was heavy and still. thick with the smell of damp earth and rot. The light from their single remaining torch, carried by Zorro, cast long, distorted shadows that danced on the rough, muddy walls, turning the faces of the clan into monstrous, terrified masks. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rasping sound of their breathing and the squish of their hands and feet in the thick mud. Alara, clutching Kai to her chest, crawled on her hands and knees. The tunnel was so narrow that her shoulders scraped against the rough, cold stone on both sides. The feeling of being so confined, of being trapped in the belly of the earth, was a new, more terrible kind of fear. She could not stand, could not turn. The world was reduced to the muddy floor in front of her, the rough walls on either side, and the small, flickering light of Zorro's torch in the distance. Kai whimpered, his face pale with terror. "I don't like it," he whispered, his small voice echoing in the confined space. "It's too dark." Alara pressed him closer, her voice a low, soothing sound. "We're going to be okay. We're going to get through this." But she did not believe her own words. The clan moved in a slow, agonizing procession, their bodies a chain of misery and fear. The deeper they went, the more treacherous the tunnel became. The floor was uneven, and they had to crawl over sharp, jagged rocks that scraped their skin and tore their clothes. Small rivulets of muddy water flowed down from the ceiling, cold and slimy against their skin. The air grew thinner, and the smell of rot became more pronounced, a sickly sweet stench that made their stomachs turn. It was the smell of things that had been buried for too long, of secrets that should have remained hidden. Suddenly, a cry of terror echoed through the tunnel. It was Alara's sister, Maya. "A rat! A rat!" she shrieked, her voice high and hysterical. The torchlight illuminated the source of her fear, a large, fleshy, sightless rat, its body bloated and pale, its whiskers twitching as it scurried past her. The sight of the creature, a thing of darkness and decay, was a powerful psychological blow. It was not just an animal, it was a symbol of their new reality. They were no longer hunters, no longer masters of their world. They were just worms, crawling in the dark, sharing a tomb with creatures of the abyss. Zorro, his voice a low, strained sound, tried to calm them. "Keep moving. Do not stop." But the fear had taken hold. It was a tangible thing, a thick, palpable presence that filled the small space. Alara's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drum of terror. She saw a small alcove in the wall, a slight widening of the tunnel. She crawled into it, pulling Kai with her, and sat there, panting, her body shaking with a profound, unshakable fear. She looked at her son's small, terrified face, and a new, terrible thought came to her. What if this was not a way out, but a trap? What if Zorro had led them to a place from which there was no return? The thought was a new, colder terror that settled deep in her bones. The journey through the tunnel was a long, agonizing descent into the Earth's silent, suffocating core. The air grew cooler, and the scent of rot was replaced by a sterile, damp smell. The walls of the tunnel were no longer just rough, cold stone. They were now covered in strange, luminous fungi that glowed with a soft, ethereal light, casting a ghostly bluish glow on the faces of the clan. The silence was no longer absolute. It was filled with a low, constant drip of water, a sound that was both maddeningly regular and strangely soothing. Alara continued to crawl, her muscles aching, her mind a dizzying mix of terror and exhaustion. She held Kai tightly, his small body a source of both strength and a terrible, unrelenting fear. The tunnel twisted and turned, and she felt a sense of profound disorientation. They had been crawling for an eternity, it seemed, with no end in sight. The tunnel had become their entire world, a suffocating, terrifying universe of darkness and cold. As they crawled, a new sound began to emerge from the darkness. A low, sibilant whisper, a sound that seemed to come from the very walls of the tunnel. The whispers were not just sounds, they were voices. Old voices. They spoke of a time before, of the clan's ancestors who had walked this same path. They spoke of the great flood, of the time the mountain wept, of the many who had been lost. They spoke of the secrets of the earth, of the bones of ancient beasts, and the stories of their people, told not in words, but in the slow, agonizing drip of water on stone. A low moan escaped Maya's lips. She looked at Alara, her eyes wide with terror. "I hear them," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They are talking to me. The ghosts of the old ones. They are telling me to go back." The whispers were a form of psychological torture, a constant reminder of the failure of the past, of the countless lives that had been lost to the unforgiving earth. They were not just a clan anymore. They were a procession of shadows, crawling through a tunnel of ghosts, their journey a grim echo of the journeys of their ancestors, a terrible reenactment of a long-forgotten tragedy. Zorro, his face grim with fatigue, tried to reassure them. "It's just the water," he said, his voice raw. "The water and the wind. Keep moving." But his words held no conviction. He, too, heard the whispers. He, too, felt the weight of the past. The tunnel was not just a physical obstacle. It was a psychological one, a test of their will to survive, a confrontation with the ghosts of their own history. Suddenly, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. They spoke of a great darkness, of a place where the mountain had swallowed a whole clan, a place where their bones still lay, a silent testament to their failure. The whispers were no longer just a warning. They were a threat. The tunnel groaned, and a shower of pebbles fell from the ceiling, narrowly missing Alara. The air grew still, heavy with a terrible, expectant silence. The whispers had stopped, but the memory of their chilling words lingered, a haunting echo in the darkness. They were on the wrong path. The tunnel was not a way out. It was a way to another tomb. The whispers had ceased, but their message lingered, a terrible, unspoken truth that hung in the air. The clan, a chain of miserable bodies, was now a group of individuals, each one of them consumed by their own fear. They had stopped moving. The tunnel, a suffocating nightmare, now held a new, more terrifying kind of silence. The silence of a group of people on the brink of collapse, of a community that was about to shatter under the weight of its own despair. Zorro, his face a mask of grim determination, spoke. "We must turn back," he said, his voice a low, rough sound. "The tunnel is not safe." The whispers were a warning. "We must find another way." But his words were met with a storm of protest. "Go back?" Aris shrieked, his voice thin with hysteria. "Go back to what? The tomb we just escaped? No, I will not." Others murmured in agreement, their voices a low, angry chorus. "We must go forward," said a woman named Lena. "The darkness is better than the tomb." The clan was divided, a schism born of fear and desperation. Half of them, led by Aris, wanted to push forward, to gamble on the hope that the whispers were a lie, a cruel trick of the mountain. The other half, led by Zorro, wanted to retreat, to try and find another way. Alara, clutching Kai, stood at a crossroads. The path forward was a dark, unknown journey, filled with the ghosts of the past. The path back was a return to the known, a grim, suffocating prison of rock and rubble. She looked at Zorro, his face a mask of exhaustion and despair. She looked at Aris, his eyes burning with a wild, desperate hope. The decision was hers to make, and it was a decision that would determine her fate and the fate of her son. The clan was fracturing, breaking into two pieces, a terrible, final testament to the fragility of their community. "I will go back," Alara said, her voice a low, firm sound. "I will not risk the life of my son on the whispers of a ghost." Her words were a shock, a sudden, unexpected act of defiance. Others, emboldened by her courage, chose to follow her. The clan was now officially two groups, a sad, broken procession moving in opposite directions. Zorro, with a look of profound relief, led his small group back the way they came, a small, courageous band of survivors who had chosen the known over the unknown, the predictable over the treacherous. Aris, his face a mix of anger and resentment, led his group deeper into the abyss, their torch a small, defiant light disappearing into the darkness. Alara and her group moved with a grim, determined purpose. They retraced their steps, their journey back through the worm's belly, a different kind of horror. The silence was filled with the terrible knowledge of their choice, the chilling question of whether they had just made the right decision. They crawled for what seemed like another eternity, their bodies aching, their minds numb with fatigue. And then a small sound, a low, rhythmic thudding, the sound of stone being chipped. It was coming from the blocked entrance to the cave. They were not alone. There was someone on the other side. A small flicker of hope, so fragile it was almost painful, ignited in Alara's chest. They had made the right choice. They were not a ghost story, they were survivors. The sound was a beacon of hope, a steady, rhythmic thudding that was the sweetest music they had ever heard. The small group of survivors, led by Alara and Zoro, crawled with a newfound strength, their bodies propelled by a desperate, exhilarating hope. The tunnel, once a tomb, was now a passage to freedom. The thudding grew louder, a powerful, reassuring beat. It was the sound of life, of a promise of salvation. They reached the end of the tunnel, a small, rough wall of rock that was the last obstacle to their freedom. The thudding stopped. A deep, powerful voice, not of their clan, echoed through the stone. "Hello?" It asked. "Are you there?" "We hear you." The words were a revelation. They were not alone. The world had not forgotten them. Zoro, his face a mask of relief and exhaustion, answered. "Yes, we are here. We are here." The sound of stone being chipped began again, and the wall of rock began to crumble. The thuds replaced by the sound of rocks falling, of a passage being cleared. Alara, holding Kai, watched as a small hole appeared in the wall. A sliver of light, a brilliant, blinding white, pierced the darkness. The air, once so stale and suffocating, was replaced by a cool, clean breeze, a breath of fresh air that was the most beautiful thing she had ever felt. The hole grew larger, and a face appeared. It was a face she did not know, a man of another clan, his face grim with the effort of digging. He smiled a tired, weary smile when he saw them. "Come," he said. "Come out. You are safe." They crawled out, one by one, into the bright light of a new day. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world that was clean and green and vibrant. The air smelled of wet earth and new life. The sun, a warm, gentle presence, shone down on them, a promise of a future that had almost been lost. They were alive. They had survived. They were no longer a group of traumatized, broken survivors, but a small, determined band of people who had cheated death. They looked back at the cave, now just a dark, silent gash in the cliff face. It was no longer a home, but a grave, a tomb for the many who had not made it. The other group, the ones who had chosen to go deeper into the tunnel, were gone. They had chosen the path of the whispers, and they had been swallowed by the darkness. The old woman's warnings, the ghosts of the past, had been proven true. They had made the right choice. The new clan, the one that had saved them, offered them food and water. They were kind, their faces etched with a profound empathy for the survivors. As Alara held Kai, a small, bright smile on his face, she looked out at the vast green landscape. She had lost her home, her community had fractured, and she had faced a darkness she had not known existed. But she had survived. She had a new clan now, a new beginning. She knew that the memory of the darkness would always be with her, a silent shadow in her heart. But it would also be a reminder of her strength, of the choices she had made to survive. The past was a ghost, a story that would be whispered in the dark. But the future was a promise, a new chapter that was just beginning, a story of hope and survival in a world that was both beautiful and terrible.